Hello, my name is Michael Marshall and I'm a science writer based in the UK. I'm also the author of this new book, The Genesis Quest. This is my first book and it's an account of one of the biggest and most profound mysteries in modern science, namely, how did life on Earth begin? And for me, this question is on a par with questions like how the universe itself began and how and why consciousness exists as one of the great challenges that science still has to face. So when I decided a few years ago that I was going to write my first book, it was kind of a no-brainer that I would tackle this particular question because it's something that has fascinated me for many years. The book really interweaves two threads, the first of which is the clash of scientific ideas, the many different hypotheses that have been put forward to explain how life might have begun. And the second is the stories of the scientists themselves and the trials and tribulations that they went through in order to try to study and approach this question. It's not a question that science has yet fully resolved, I would say. There are still a great many competing hypotheses. So perhaps the most famous is the idea that life began in what's called the primordial soup, so an ocean thick in carbon-based chemicals. But there are a great many other ideas that, in fact, arguably have more to offer than that particular suggestion. One, for example, is that life instead began on land in a pool or a pond or lake, perhaps a geothermal pond in a volcanic area. But set against that is another competing hypothesis that life in fact began in what's called an alkaline vent. So kind of the deep sea equivalent of a hot spring, a place on the seabed where hot water from below the surface bubbles up through the rocks and carries chemicals and minerals up into the cold seawater above. And as I say, this question really hasn't been resolved, but as you read the book and and discover the many different experiments that have been done over the years, you start to see that there is perhaps the beginnings of a consensus about the kinds of processes that might have been involved in making the first life and the kinds of environments and chemicals that would have been required. One of the things that I think is a really key message of the book is that a great many of the hypotheses that have been put forward for explaining the origin of life are probably wrong in their totality. But that doesn't mean that they don't have merits buried in them. There are core ideas or elements of those hypotheses that even though the wider idea might be wrong, there are these elements that I think are really crucial nevertheless. And as we move towards, for want of a better expression, a grand unified theory of how life might have begun, many of these ideas are going to have to be salvaged from older hypotheses and brought back into the light. So as I say, I try to interweave both the personal stories of the scientists and the clash of ideas that they've been engaged in over the last century. So I hope that it is a book really for everyone who has even the remotest interest in this question. I've tried to go into as many of the different ideas as I can, so that you can, if there's a particular idea that you've heard of and you've always wondered, well, is that really right? You're almost certainly going to find it in here, and hopefully you'll gain some understanding of how that idea came about and what merits and what flaws it has. So once again, the book is called The Genesis Quest, and it's out now from the University of Chicago Press in the US. Thank you for watching.